Hello once again to Viper Bites, presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. Before we dive into the top 5 fantasy assets here for the Seattle Seahawks, take a second, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code Vipers22, and get 10% off your subscription today. Now let's get at it as we continue this 32-team series, talking about DK Metcalf and what he means to the Seattle Seahawks team now and moving forward. Geno Smith, Drew Lock, heck, even if Jimmy Garoppolo ends up there, they won't be the quarterback for the Seahawks in the next 2 to 3 seasons. We have a small sample size of what we can work with, what we're looking forward to in this DK Metcalf, Geno Smith type dynamic. We know Geno Smith has this locker room right now. The players in there, hey, Geno's a pretty good dude. In 4 games with Smith under center, Metcalf would record 19 receptions for 296 yards and 5 touchdowns. One area of concern was that DK Metcalf's yards per game dropped from 81.4 per in 2022 to just 56.9 in 2021. Some of that is on Geno Smith. Some of that is on Russell Wilson and that finger injury and what he dealt with all season long. We know Metcalf is going to see targets. He saw 129 of them last season, which is roughly 7.6 targets per game. For his career, Metcalf has been one of the best receivers. I mean, that's with Russell Wilson, averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game with 4.4 receptions and 7.3 targets per game, averaging 69.6 yards per contest. And that's after last season's dip in productivity. Metcalf finished with a 26% target share last year, but I am more interested in how many of those targets were qualifying as catchable last year, because we've seen what he was working with there. I mean, when you're as big and as talented as DK Metcalf is, sure, balls that aren't normally catchable are catchable, but there's a lot of out there that he simply wasn't getting to. Now, the other wide receiver there in Seattle is Tyler Lockett. Right now, the expert consensus ranking have him going off as the Dynasty wide receiver 26 or the 84th overall player. While Metcalf performed well with Geno Smith over a 4-game stretch, Lockett did not, with the exception of that one game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like Metcalf, the quarterback situation presents more questions than answers for fantasy managers. Lockett and Smith didn't seem that they were on the same page last year. Drew Lock, he even has more accuracy concerns, and Geno Smith has concerns. Jimmy Garoppolo is also a potential replacement there in Seattle, but right now, as of this recording, he's in San Francisco, and he's coming off a shoulder surgery, and it seems weird to even tie his name to a division rival in Seattle. Now is the time to buy the dip on Tyler Lockett, who is going 4 rounds later than DK Metcalf in fantasy drafts, despite similar fantasy production over the last few years. In fact, if you are looking for big plays, Lockett's 7 touchdowns of 40 or more yards over the last 3 seasons, they trail only A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Derrick Henry. Now, at running back, we got a couple good running backs here in Seattle that I want to talk about. First off, let's talk about the rookie here in Ken Walker III. Eventually, this is going to be Ken Walker's backfield, just not yet. Seattle actually ran the fewest plays per game last season, averaging just 58.2 plays per contest. For any player on the Seahawks roster right now to find fantasy success, it's going to come down to becoming efficient with their opportunities. Looking at the last 2 draft classes to come through, when you're looking at the touchdowns, the first downs, the big runs per attempt, Walker sits 12th, and that is somewhat concerning considering the volume may not be there right at the beginning. Now for the good. When Graham Barfield loves what he sees in a prospect, you take note. Walker's 5.86 yards created per attempt topped even Breece Hall in that category, while his 0.39 missed tackles per attempt were tops in the class, even ahead of Dameon Pierce. Despite how talented Rashad Penny is, and we'll talk about that here in a second, he has never been given that seal of approval from Seattle brass. He's always had to play behind Chris Carson. Yes, injuries have played a factor in that, but Seattle used a high-end draft capital pick here to bring in Walker. The last spot on this Fantasy 5 on the Seahawks offense came down to Rashad Penny and Noah Fant. Noah Fant is going off as the tight end 12 in Dynasty. But Seattle, they did bring Penny back in on a 1-year deal that pays him among the top 12 backs in the NFL. Penny's actually being drafted quite a bit later than Walker is in drafts right now, despite being the most efficient back last season. Not the most efficient back on Seattle, not the most efficient back in the NFC West, not the most efficient back in the NFC, the most efficient back in the entire National Football League. Let's look at that 6-game stretch at the end of the season, shall we? In 6 games, Penny would carry the ball only 102 times, and yet he produced 706 yards on the ground, 6.92 per carry, with 6 touchdowns, finishing as the RB5 for that period with 19.6 fantasy points per game. Over the course of the season, Penny's 6.3 yards per carry were nearly a full yard per attempt, more than the second highest back, which happened to be Nick Chubb, who averaged 5.5 yards per carry. Those 6.3 yards per carry last year were the second highest, dating back all the way to 2010, when Jamal Charles, you remember that name, averaged 6.4 yards per carry. If and when Penny gets an opportunity, look for him to cash in on those fantasy points, either in Seattle or somewhere else. Now, let's talk about, I talked about those 4 players there. So you're like, well, why can't you slide Noah Fant in here? Because I want to throw IDP in here, and I want to talk about Jordan Brooks, linebacker 5, big-time season last year. Brooks is the reason why the Seattle Seahawks felt that they could release all-pro linebacker Bobby Wagner. When you put up 184 tackles, 109 of the solo variety, you are going to make IDP managers very, very happy. Sure, Brooks struggles in coverage, but I don't care about coverage. I care about tackles because tackles equate to fantasy points. NFL executives, players, coaches, they rank Brooks inside the top 10 when it comes to off-the-ball linebackers in the NFL. And when you get an 82.9 PFF run grade on third and short situations, people take notice. When you're going to make those tackles on third down, hey, I'll take a tackle. That's 1 point for fantasy each and every time you simply take a dude down. And if you want to take down your competition, you have to head to fantasypoints.com today. And if you want to save 10%, use promo code Vipers22. While you're at it, if you listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, any podcasting platform out there, take a second, rate and review us. And if you're watching us here right now on the Vipers Network, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and make sure those notifications are turned on, because we got new content coming at you daily right up until kickoff that you do not want to miss. We'll see you next time.